Hi guys, welcome to another episode. Today we're going to talk about how to develop non-linear fills. So linear fills have always this good feeling of playing many notes and making it feel like there's a lot going on, and it's very cool because it gives you that fast feeling most of the times. And it just sounds great. But sometimes developing non-linear fills can also be a great tool because we can implement them with the linear fills that we're doing and make some points where it's like the linear fill reach a peak and we can use the non-linear fill. But on the other side, it can be kind of weird to create a non-linear fill which is not made only of playing snare and cymbals together or kick and cymbals together. So today we're going to see some variations and how we can use this type of fills in a musical way and in different points of, for example, a song or of a groove or of a fill itself. So as you guys may know, a linear fill is when every stroke plays isolated, so it's none of our arms or limbs ever play together. Instead, of course, a non-linear fill will be opposite of that. It's going to be when two parts of our body are playing unison, so it can be the hands, the feet, or one hand and one foot, and so on. First of all, I want to also talk about something that in a non-linear fill situation, and this also works in linear fills, but in a non-linear fill it's even more important, in my opinion, is that whenever we choose how to, which parts of our body, which parts of our drums we want to play together, what makes a good sound, what makes the nonlinear fill sound good is the opposition of frequencies, meaning that, for example, the bass drum is a very low, has a very low frequency. Instead, the snare drum, for example, has a very high frequency. So it's good to mix them together, because if not, for example, if I mix the bass drum and the floor tom, it won't have the same effect. It will feel like weird. So let's start, for example, to see a couple of variations that we can do using the nonlinear fill. Usually how I do this is I either start with the sticking in my hands, so for example the paradiddle, and then I choose to, for example, put the kick unison to all the right hand strokes, so something like this. When we speed this up, this is the result. And it gives you this nice effect because it just follows the right hand, so it's not too complicated, it's just. But it creates this nice effect. So in my opinion, this is a good way. And by the way, playing snare and kick together, it's another great effect that I like to do and I like to use. Or for example, I can accent all the I can play with my bass drum all the accents of the paradiddle. So for example, then I can add accents to the paradiddle. Or I can play all the strokes that I play with my left hand. Okay, and so on. I can create all these type of patterns just basing the kick on what my hands are doing. So either choosing follow the right hand for the left hand for the strokes, the accents, sorry. Or I can also create patterns or play strokes with my bass drum that are not going exactly with what my hands are doing. So it doesn't follow any specific parts that my hands are playing, but they're creating like a feeling underneath, like if I'm going into something like, for example, something like this. okay, this gives me like a feeling that my hands are doing something, and the bass drum is kind of like starting to build up something to get somewhere, you know. And it goes somewhere. It's like a little phrase that I'm putting underneath. Or I can play, I don't know, like a 7 or a 5 on top of what I'm doing here. And go on in the groove. And you know, it's just all these effects that we can apply and use to create something and to, you know, have the possibility of doing stuff with our hands and then starting to build something on top of it that's going to introduce in what's coming next. Or of course then from here we can, for example, move our hands and find other sounds. Like for example, I can move my left hand on the hi-hat and do the same thing that I was doing before, following either hands or just playing these patterns that I was playing, so something like this. And so on. So just by starting to move one of the hands, I can obtain other effects. Or I can just, you know, play whatever I'm doing with my strokes on the cymbals. So something like this. Okay, or you can implement this in a linear fill or in another fill that you're doing to kind of like, I like to use it in a way that it's like what I'm doing, it reaches a peak. Okay, it's like I'm playing on this linear fill and then I go on the non-linear fill to kind of like accent and outline certain parts of the fill, and in this way it's like it builds even more you know, the fill that I'm playing to then explode in something else. So for example, something like this. So it kind of gets even more intense in those parts, and it gives a dynamic to the feel. It gives a arriving point also to the feel. It's like I'm building something. Okay, it's like the final phrase in this case, or you know, you can use it in many different ways. This is just a couple examples. Another thing, of course, would be to use my hands together, and so build, like, for example, a fill, and I always maintain the frequency rule. So, for example, a nice way of using this could be one of the most used, so floor and snare together. Or cymbals and hands together. Or floor and cymbals together, for example. Or moving around. And finding different solutions. You can also play crisscross. You know, whatever you guys want to do, but that's another example of how to use this kind of non-linear fields. And then if we want to use this in a groove, a couple of ideas or a couple of ways that I've tried and used this type of fills, it would be like something like this. Okay, so again, these are just some examples of how you can use the nonlinear fills, how you can apply them in a musical context or in the fills itself, and some combinations. Remember the rule of the frequencies that usually helps to create a very nice effect on these type of fills. So be creative, come up with all your ideas, get all the rudiments and try to play with your kicks, whatever your right hand is doing and then your left and so on. Have fun, and I'll see you next time.